And good afternoon. Welcome back. This is going to be the end of the Pacific Theater. It's part 2, so if you haven't seen part 1 of the Pacific Theater yet, go back and get yesterday's link. Anyway, part 2. We just finished up with the Battle of Midway, and that is called Midway Island because it's kind of the midway point between Japan and the U.S., and it's also kind of the midway point in the war between Japan and the U.S., because before the Battle of Midway, Japan was conquering a bunch of islands, the Philippines and smaller ones on the way sort of toward Hawaii and toward the American coast. And the Battle of Midway is where the Americans were able to turn the tide. There were certainly losses on the American side in the Battle of Midway, but they were able to inflict heavy losses on the Japanese during the Battle of Midway and start pushing back toward the Japanese mainland. So one of the problems the U.S. Navy has to solve is that a bunch of these small islands in between Hawaii and Japan have been conquered by the Japanese, and they've set up small military bases, small naval bases, small airstrips for planes. And if you just take the Navy and run it straight at the Japanese homeland, all of these Japanese planes and boats and soldiers could sort of come in behind you and trap you, and it'd be a pretty rough naval situation. So the solution that the U.S. military came up with for this problem was to block off and try and reconquer these islands. So the islands that weren't super heavily defended, they could just send troops in and reconquer the island, take out any airstrips they had, any bases they had, any ships that they had. But some of the bigger islands that were heavily defended, the U.S. Navy basically just blockaded them to make sure that they couldn't come after us when the main Navy moved past on the way to Japan. But those navies, those Japanese soldiers and boats and planes didn't just sit there and go, "Oh well, I guess we're surrounded." Like, there was incredibly deadly fighting all throughout this whole period here. One of those is the Battle of Leyte Gulf from October 23rd to the 26th of 1944. As far as the amount of boats and planes and people involved, this is the largest naval battle of World War II, and quite possibly the biggest naval battle in the history of the world. So if you are one of those people that's really into military history, especially into like naval military history, this is the battle. And you probably know more about it than I do already. But for those of you that don't know more about this battle already than I do, this is the retaking of the Philippines. This is General MacArthur taking his chunk of the Navy to the Philippines to reconquer the Philippines away from the Japanese. And they are ultimately successful. But this is when the Japanese sort of desperation is seen for the first time. They have lost a lot of planes, they've lost a lot of pilots, and so they have these planes that don't have much fuel, and they don't have a whole lot of bullets on them, just because they're running low on steel, and they're running low on coal, and they're running low on oil, and they're running low on experienced pilots. So they they sort of put together this training course on just how to fly a plane real quick to these, kids, basically, that they're not 7 or 8 years old, but certainly 16, 17, 18 years old, that don't have any real experience, don't have any real safety features. There's no real, there's not enough steel left to really armor these planes. So they just make a plane that can get up in the air, fire a few shots, drop a bomb or two, and then the plane itself would crash into, a ship or another plane. I don't know if that ever really happened, but into ships mainly, to try and just deal as much damage as they could on the way out. These were known as kamikaze attacks. You may have heard of those before. Kamikaze does not mean suicide. They were suicide attacks. The pilots had zero chance of surviving, this kamikaze attack. But kamikaze is not Japanese for suicide. Kamikaze is Japanese for divine wind. Kami meaning divine or God or spirit. I'm not speak Japanese. I don't have the exact translation for you, but that's where we get the word divine from in the translation. And then kaze is pretty directly wind. So kamikaze is the divine wind. And the reason they named it after that, the divine wind, is because, a few hundred years ago when the Mongolians had tried to invade Japan twice, both times when they got on their boats to head across the water from China to Japan, a giant storm would rise up and sink a bunch of the Mongolian boats and push them back to the mainland. And the Japanese thought that was, heaven protecting them. Not that they were Christians and believed in a Christian view of heaven, but that religion sort of it doesn't translate directly as heaven, but you get the idea. We don't have time to get into Shintoism and Japanese religion of the 14 and 1500s, but that's where the name comes from. It doesn't mean suicide. And General MacArthur returns to the Philippines, retakes them from Japan, and shortly after World War II is when we grant the Philippines their independence. You might remember when we took them from Spain and they thought that we were going to free them then. No, but now we do. So this is one of those ones, again, if you're a naval battle person, this is the battle you want to look into. Again, there are documentaries, there are movies, there are books about everything that went down in those battles. The Battle of Okinawa is pretty much the last big battle in the Pacific Ocean between America and Japan. This takes place from April 1st to June 22nd, 1945. This is almost 3 months of just, very close to 3 months of just constant fighting. The U.S. Navy and the Marines, they launched an attack on one of the Japanese home islands that just lasts for months and months. 12,000 U.S. soldiers are killed, 100,000 Japanese soldiers are killed, and somewhere, we don't have exact numbers, about somewhere around 100,000 Japanese civilians were killed. Now that's just one of the things that happens in war. When you're attacking enemy territory, you're going to kill a lot of civilians. But another part of this is that the military was arming the civilians and just saying, hey, here's a gun, go run at these U.S. soldiers. So it's kind of hard to tell exactly who were soldiers, exactly who were civilians. But the Battle of Okinawa is it's a hugely important battle. It lasts for months and months and months. Tons of casualties on both sides of this battle. And what it does is it makes the military not afraid and not nervous, but it definitely makes them think, what if we attack other Japanese islands? If we send the military after these other islands in Japan, how much is that going to cost us? How many of our soldiers are going to die trying to take these islands of Japan? And this is where a sort of new option enters into play. This is when President Truman has recently taken over. FDR had died of his polio complications just a couple of months, I think, before this whole decision has to be made. Sorry, just 1 second. Maybe I'll know enough about videos editing that I can cut this part out. All right. If there was a quick little jump cut right there, it's because I figured out video editing. And if there wasn't, then, well, I didn't. So, President Truman, as and we'll talk about this in class, but the Manhattan Project, which is the, secret group of top secret military thing that figured out nuclear weapons, it was so top secret, not even Vice President Harry Truman knew about it. When FDR died and Truman became president, that was one of the things they had to tell him. oh, by the way, we've figured out nuclear bombs and we have 2 of them, and we're planning on dropping them on Japan. And President Truman had to sort of either give the green light to that or stop it. And military, I mean, the common story told in history books, the common story told in history books is that military intelligence estimates that there's going to be hundreds of thousands of U.S. casualties if we were to just invade Japan in a normal way, and we'd have to kill basically every Japanese adult and probably a lot of Japanese children, because they would be given bombs and grenades and guns and stuff and told to attack U.S. troops to defend, the homeland. And the Manhattan Project was the alternative. If we could detonate 2 nuclear bombs, or at least a nuclear bomb, maybe both of them, that might, get the Japanese to surrender. And recent histories have been coming out sort of questioning that narrative. By the time, if you end up having kids or nieces or nephews or whatever, by the time they're in history class, they might have a more, they might have a different version of events based on new evidence that's been, discovered, or, that might turn out to be some interesting theories without a ton of evidence behind it. We'll kind of see. History's a living thing, we'll see. But as far as, most historians are concerned right now, the choice is invade Japan and get a bunch of Americans killed, or drop a nuclear bomb and show off this new weapon that the U.S. has. And nobody knows about these yet. No one has any clue about them. And they also don't know we only have 2 of them, which is about to be very important. So these are aerial views of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay, the name of the bomber, drops a nuclear bomb on the city of Hiroshima. We'll talk about some of the details, such as the size of the bomb and the rest, in class. But about 80,000 people are killed immediately by the fireball and some of the radiation, with another 70,000 injured, and a bunch more die of their injuries over the next, few weeks and months, and especially the radiation injuries. 3 days later, the bomber boxcar drops a second nuclear bomb on the city of Nagasaki. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 80,000 people are killed immediately, another 60,000 injured. The vast majority of the dead in these cases are civilians. These are not military bases. There's factories in those cities that were probably producing bullets and guns and stuff, but there weren't troops being housed there. There weren't barracks. There weren't, anything like that. These targets were designed to terrify the Japanese government into surrendering, and it seems like it mostly worked. Now that comes at the cost of somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200,000 civilians killed, which is not too far off from the number that were killed in the Battle of Okinawa. So I don't know. I wasn't there. One of the reasons I'm a teacher and not the president is I don't know how to make a decision like that. That seems too big. So August the 14th, 1945, just a few days later, Japan officially surrenders. It takes a little bit of time to sort of work out the details. This picture here is Emperor Hirohito of Japan. He, of the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, he's the only one to make it out of World War II alive. Hitler commits suicide. A couple days before that, Mussolini had been found by Italians that were still angry at him and murdered. And a few months later, Japan surrenders, and Emperor Hirohito is allowed to keep his life and his title as emperor. So August the 14th, 1945, we call that VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day. And this is a small cut of his speech that he gave when he surrendered, and that was sort of sent out. Obviously, it's translated from Japanese into English. because he would have been talking to his subjects in Japanese. But this is one translation. To our good and loyal subjects, we have ordered our government to communicate to the governments of the United States, Great Britain, China, and the Soviet Union that our empire accepts the provisions of their joint declaration. Moreover, the enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is, indeed, incalculable, taking the toll of many innocent lives. Should we continue to fight, it would not only result in the ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but also it would lead to the total extinction of human civilization. So that's officially the end of World War II. Germany had surrendered, Italy had surrendered, and now Japan has surrendered. And we'll talk about all this and more in class. I'll take your questions as always. And the question we're going to be ending the day with, just to give you a heads up for tomorrow, is, did Truman make the right choice? Was Truman correct? Should he have dropped the bombs the way he did? And pretty soon we'll be talking about the Cold War between the US and Russia. And I've definitely seen plenty of arguments from historians over the course of my, learning and teaching career that the audience of people who was supposed to see our two nukes wasn't so much the Japanese as it was the Russians. They were our allies in World War II, but Truman may have been looking forward to a time, not like looking forward like hooray, but just like looking forward into the future and seeing a time where Russia would be our biggest threat and our biggest challenge. And hey, maybe if we show them that we have so many of these nukes that we can just drop two of them in a few days apart from each other, clearly we have a lot more of them. If that's true, we didn't, that was a lie. But maybe the audience for those bombs was Russia and not Japan so much. So we'll talk more about that in class tomorrow, and you'll get to make your final call at the end of the day. You think Truman did the right thing or not, and why? So I don't have an answer for you, what's right or not. You'll need to know that all this stuff happened. There will not be a correct answer on the STAR test to did Truman do the right thing. You'll need to know that Truman did order the nuking of the two cities. You'll need to know that nuking those two cities did lead to, the surrender of Japan and victory in Japan Day. But, we can't ask you on a multiple choice question test, did Truman do the right thing? But we'll talk about it tomorrow. So take care. Have a good one. Maybe make sure you go get all your laundry out of the laundry room. Just go put it away. Get that chore off someone else's list. Unless it's your chore, in which case just go ahead and get that off of future use list. And we'll be taking the quiz, and then we'll be doing the review and the test and all that stuff over the next few days. And then we'll pick up with Unit 8, talking about the Cold War. See you then.